Hello, Mike Rasmussen here from Where's Your Next on this Friday, the 28th, last day of February 28th, 2025. Wow, there's a lot of things to cover, a lot of things going on. So today, I really want to address on my vlogcast why DEI cannot die. And when you hear the term diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a reason for that. It's because um, as you look at the various realities of what's happening and how things have gone, this has become very much politicized. And so I think it's important to kind of talk through this, use some common sense to talk through this issue and really talk about why diversity should remain, why it should be something that we should celebrate and also try to continue to keep at the forefront of business and staffing and recruiting. So I think that's important. So let me walk you through a few things here. Um, I have found some good resources from a wide variety of different things about why diversity, equity, and inclusion is a good thing. Specifically, if we want to focus mostly on diversity itself and what that really means and what we're talking about when we look at that. If you look at diversity in and of itself, I don't see it necessarily as checking a box so much as it is a long term strategy for business success. And I think some people have lost sight of that in this time, and that's unfortunate. Let's talk about why I feel that way. Um, so many times you see this inclusion and diversity side of things, and much of that stems from the reality of what we've seen where there's been a lot of changes in how inclusion is anticipated. Maybe that stems from affirmative action in the past and what may have been well-intentioned approaches to you know keeping things at the forefront. But true diversity is all about business success. It's all about um, really having a workforce that's empowered to serve your customers. That's the way I look at diversity. And I think it's a different perspective. I think it's something that we need to take into account. We should be serious about talking about this and not getting defensive about it either. We really do need to talk about what it really means. And so it's really a powerful thing. The more we talk about this, the more we keep it at the forefront. Um, so I think there's a few important things that may have happened that are something to keep an eye on. Um, Specifically with the executive orders. So let's talk about what's happening currently. And I'm going to share my screen real quick about the latest and greatest news on this so that you can have some facts in front of you about what is really happening. So this all began, this dialogue around um, diversity, equity, inclusion, when Republicans brought it to the forefront as a concern that it was leading to um, less opportunity versus more opportunity. Now, in all honesty, I don't see it that way. I may be simplifying this argument a little bit, but recently the political climate has just focused in on this, and I do want to share with you where we're at right now. So, as of this moment, a judge has blocked enforcement of DEI orders as applied to companies. So, for example, federal district judge in Maryland preliminary blocked several challenged provisions of President Donald Trump's executive orders on diversity, equity, inclusion, including enforcement of provisions applying to private companies. Certification and termination provisions for federal contractors also were paused in the February 21st decision. So now, federal contractors are those that work with the government, and so the contracts are contingent on specific practices that are administered by executive orders. So keep that in mind. There's just a lot going on. Plaintiffs are likely to succeed on their claim that the enforcement threat provision in the January 21st executive order titled Ending Illegal Discrimination, Restoring Merit Based Opportunity violates the First Amendment. The provision threatens to initiate enforcement actions against the plaintiffs in the form of civil compliance investigations for engaging in protected speech. Now, that's an interesting take. It's basically saying that parts of uh, diversity focus is protected by free speech. Very interesting point of view, but putting that under the First Amendment is a very interesting approach to this. Now, you know what? I think that a lot of this is going to carry itself through to conclusion, but I think it's a healthy dialogue that our democracy needs to have in talking about what's going on. And now I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater either. I think we need to keep some form of diversity, equity, and inclusion in some way, shape, or form. And I like to use the terminology belonging because that's the true spirit in terms of what I believe is trying to be achieved by any goal associated with diversity, which is to help people be their best at work. That's really it to me. I don't see this as a threat to different groups. Diversity is actually an enhancement. You've got several laws. You've got the Americans with Disabilities Act. You've got the Age Discrimination Act. You've got the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You could go on, and all those laws are part of the current focus. And so the judges are likely to look at the merits of each point of view or each lawsuit, which will be brought up and are being litigated right now, based on these specific tools that were created um, to advance these specific laws in employment and protections of employment. So the enforcement threat provision applies broadly to the private sector. Therefore, unlike with the other provisions, the analysis is based on pure private speech regulated by the First Amendment. However, the district court did not reach the same conclusion with respect to the investigative portion of the EO. Rather, Abelson said it is a directive from the president to the U.S. Attorney General to identify a plan of specific steps or measures to deter DEI or programs or principles that constitute illegal discrimination or preferences. Now, I think the argument is basically that diversity is creating uh, discrimination, which is kind of an odd argument. So to me, I don't think this is really a relevant argument. I don't think this is something we should be entertaining. So let me stop sharing my screen on this one. I do want to share a couple more things with you. Um, I don't want to get too political today. I just want to kind of focus on the reality and what's happening. And just that's the reason I shared that SHRM article with you. But now I did want to share another point of my screen with you. McKinsey has done some studies on this, and they're very interesting studies. They actually talk about why diversity is a powerful thing. And these studies are, to me, a very powerful thing, and they need to be put forward. So let's talk about these. This is an interesting Harvard Business Review. Now, I'm not going to McKinsey yet, but this is a very interesting point of view. So there's several studies throughout time that have really shown that, quite frankly, diversity in and of itself enhances the bottom line. And there's plenty of proof that show businesses that embrace diversity in their culture become a better business with more profitability. But interestingly enough, this Harvard Business Review took it a step further. Um, the case for establishing a truly diverse workforce at all organizational levels, according to the Harvard Business Review, grows more compelling each year. The financial impact, as proven by multiple studies, makes this a no-brainer. So there's so many studies that have shown this particular thing. The business case is clear. When women are at the table, the discussion is richer. The decision-making process is better, and the organization is stronger. And not just women, but multiple cultural points of view represented when when there's a customer base that is also diverse. See, that's a key point, because if your business decisions are being made with input from those communities that you serve, there's just a downstream effect uh, of a powerful opportunity there and more profitability. That's just how it is. There's numerous studies, time and time and time again, that show this. These rallying cries for more diversity in companies, from recent statements by CEOs And this article was back in November, December in 2019, even before we got into more of the dialogue about diversity. But I want to bring you down here. I think it makes a great point, and then I'm going to switch off this one, and I'll go to a couple of the studies that show some important things. But this particular point, I think, was very powerful. And it says as follows: the problem is that nearly 25 years later, after they did the initial research, the Harvard Business Review, organizations have largely failed to adopt a learning orientation toward diversity and are no closer to reaping its benefits. Instead, business leaders and diversity advocates alike are advancing a simplistic and empirically unsubstantiated version of the business case. They misconstrue or ignore what abundant research has now made clear. Increasing the numbers of traditionally underrepresented people in your workforce does not automatically produce benefits. Taking an add diversity and stir approach while business continues as usual will not spur leaps in your firm's effectiveness or financial performance. Rather, increasing diversity does not by itself increase effectiveness. What matters is how an organization harnesses diversity and whether it's willing to reshape its power structure. And despite all the rhetoric about the value of diversity, white women and people of color remain seriously underrepresented in many industries and in most companies' senior ranks. That lack of progress suggests that top executives don't actually find the business case terribly compelling. So, interestingly enough, there is a business case to be made for it. On that point, we have to agree the simplistic business case isn't persuasive. A credible and powerful case can be made, however, with three critical modifications. First, platitudes must give way to sound, empirical based conclusions. Second, business leaders must reject the notion that maximizing shareholder returns is paramount. Instead, they must embrace a broader vision of success that encompasses learning, innovation, creativity, flexibility, equity, and human dignity. I like that last part there, human dignity. Finally, leaders must acknowledge that increasing demographic diversity does not by itself increase effectiveness. What matters is how an organization harnesses diversity and whether it's willing to reshape its power structure. Now, this is a very interesting argument. And as they go down here, they continue with some very interesting points, a critique of the business case for diversity. Let's start with the claim that putting more women on corporate boards leads to economic gains. That's a fallacy probably fueled by studies that went viral a decade ago, reporting that more women directors a company has, the better its financial performance. But those studies show correlations, not causality. In all likelihood, some other factors, such as industry or firm size, is responsible for both increases in the number of women directors and improvement in a firm's performance. Let me repeat that again. But those studies show correlations, not causality. In all likelihood, some other factors, such as industry or firm size, is responsible for both increases in number of women directors and improvement in a firm's performance. In any case, the research touting the link was conducted by consulting firms and financial institutions and fails to pass muster when subjected to scholarly scrutiny. Meta-analysis of rigorous peer-reviewed studies found no significant relationships, causal or otherwise, between board gender diversity and firm performance. That could be because women directors may not differ from their male counterparts in the characteristics presumed to affect board decisions. And even if they do differ, their voices may be marginalized. Let me repeat that again. Even if they do, their voices may be marginalized. What is more pertinent, however, is that board decisions are typically too far removed from the firm's bottom line performance to exert a direct or unconditional effect. As for studies citing the positive impact of racial diversity on corporate financial performance, they do not stand up to scrutiny either. Indeed, we know of no evidence to suggest that replacing, say, 2 or 3 white male directors with people from underrepresented groups is likely to enhance the profits of a Fortune 500 company. The economic argument for diversity is no more valid when it's applied to changing the makeup of the overall workforce. A 2015 survey of Harvard Business School alumni revealed that 76% of those in senior executive positions believe that a more diverse workforce improves the organization's financial performance. But scholarly researchers have rarely found that increased diversity leads to improved financial outcomes. They have found that leads to higher quality work, better decision making, greater team satisfaction, and more equality under certain circumstances. Although those outcomes could conceivably make some aspects of the business more profitable, they would need to be extraordinarily consequential to affect a firm's bottom line. In other words, it's interesting. Moreover, advocates who justify diversity initiatives on the basis of financial benefits may be shooting themselves in the foot. Research suggests that when company diversity statements emphasize the economic payoffs, people from underrepresented groups start questioning whether the organization is a place where they can really belong, which reduces their interest in joining it. In addition, when diversity initiatives promise financial gains but fail to deliver, people are likely to withdraw their support for them. Still, another flaw in the familiar business case for diversity is the notion that a diverse team will have richer discussions and a better decision making process simply because it is diverse. Having people from various identity groups at the table is no guarantee that anything will get better. In fact, research shows that things often get worse because increasing diversity can increase tensions and conflict. Under the right organizational conditions, this being the factor that's most important, I think this is where they're going with this. Employees can turn cultural differences into assets for achieving team goals. In other words, there is more productivity when it's not just a check in the box, but the organization actually commits to it for the long haul. There's the point. Studies have shown, for example, that diverse teams realize performance benefits in certain circumstances when team members are able to reflect on and discuss team functioning. When status differences among ethnic groups are minimized, when people are from both high and low status identity groups believe the team supports learning, and as we reported in our earlier article, when teams orient members to learn from their differences rather than marginalize or deny them. But absent conditions that foster inquiry, egalitarianism, and learning, diversity is either is unrelated or undermines team effectiveness. See, it's interesting. I think this is an interesting argument, and I think I'm going to go down here a little bit because I think they're getting to the point where there's some really important points to be made. Build trust. Really, what it comes down to is you can't make folks, if you may have the best of intentions, but if your focus is not in the whole cultural belonging aspect, then what they're basically saying is diversity gets stuck. And that's the problem. So that's the bigger issue. And how do you do that? You have to have a CEO who's committed to the whole thing in order to make it work. Otherwise, it's just a an exercise in fertility. And it should be something that we focus on. DEI must not die. It must stay at the forefront. The first task for those in charge is to build trust by creating a workplace where people feel safe expressing themselves freely. And it doesn't matter the background. Every background should be made. That should be a core value of the organization. If it's just given, you know, word splicing and it's just given, uh, you know, it's paid lip service, it really doesn't get the job done. It has to be followed up. That requires setting a tone of honest discourse and getting comfortable with vulnerability, one's own and others. At no time has this need been greater in the United States than during the current unrest spurred by outrage over police brutality against Black men and women, a legacy of centuries of racism. You see, diversity in and of itself should have always been a core value. It's unfortunate that it hasn't been. And I think this is the other thing. Creating a psychological safety and building employees' trust can be an excellent starting point for the second action. Taking concrete measures to combat forms of discrimination and subordination that inhibit employees' ability to thrive. This action calls for both individual and collective learning and at producing systematic change. Over the years, we've seen the emergence of a multi-billion-dollar industry dedicated to advancing such goals. Companies have adopted a slew of initiatives as a result: affinity groups, mentoring programs, work family accommodation policies, and unconscious bias training, to name a few. But the sad truth is that these efforts largely fail to produce meaningful, sustained change and sometimes even backfire, which may be why we're going through some of the stuff we're going through. Now, I don't want to, I think it is important that I think what has happened is a lot of these organizations have paid lip service to diversity, and it was more about there was always a need for belonging that should have existed, but it wasn't there. To that end, the first step for leaders is to learn about how systems of privilege and oppression, racism, sexism, ethnocentrism, classism, heterosexism, operate in the wider culture. Numerous excellent books and articles can help with this work. They've added benefit of relieving those on the receiving end of oppressive systems from the burden of educating their majority group counterparts. And the impact can be surprising. For example, major news organizations picked up the story of a black flight attendant who noticed a white male passenger reading a book about white people's reluctance to confront racism. She struck up a conversation with the man and had a moving exchange with him, eventually learning that he was the CEO of a major airline. The encounter filled her with hope. Here was a powerful executive, someone in a position to effect change, making a genuine effort to understand the systematic racism. And there is the key for diversity success. And I would add belonging to that. In other words, you can't just pay lip service to a culture and then check a box because people see right through that. White people see through it, black people see through it, all races see through it, all cultures see through it. If you're not doing it for the right reasons, for the humanity and celebrating the core of what unites us rather than divides us, your diversity could get stuck. That's it right there. And that's what I'm trying to say. And I think that's the point of this article that I think I like is that, I like this embrace a wide range of styles and voices. The third necessary action for leaders and managers involves actively trying to understand how organizational norms might implicitly discourage certain behavioral styles or silence certain voices. For example, in companies where the prototypical leader is a white man who earns respect by speaking assertively, women and black men who are often penalized for being assertive may find themselves in a double bind. They can conform to the organization's norms and deviate from cultural prescriptions for their group, or they can do the opposite. But either way, they violate one of the expectations, risking marginalization and diminished chances for advancement. Now, this can happen in anywhere. We see this with the LGBTQ, especially trans people right now. If you're aware of trans people, they will feel marginalized based on the current climate, which is why the humanity of what diversity should entail is also quite important. And so, for that reason, I'm just making a business case that diversity should not die. Rather, it needs to be taken to another level that is beyond checking a box. And that's the key. That's the key to success right there. Now, let me share some other things with you that I think you might find interesting, that you may find helpful. I'm going to stop sharing my screen on this one real quick. Um, and I hope this article was valuable. If you want to go check it out, it's getting serious about diversity. Um, Getting serious about diversity enough already with the business case. So these two folks, Robin J. Eli and David A. Thomas, did a good job of writing why this was important and what the steps should be. Now, the business case is still there, but the problem is that when it's lip service and not there's no action behind it, that's the problem. And I think that's what they were getting at. So let me stop sharing this one, and I'm going to go to another article I want to share with all of you that I think can be helpful as well. And I really want to address this with all of you and see. Here's another reason this is important. So I'm going to share um, another focus. So diversity from McKinsey. And this was shared in 2023, December 5th, 2023. As a matter of fact, it's only really a year old, and there's a lot of really important points. McKinsey, as you know, is a strategy company, and they advise businesses on strategy. So I think there's a case to be made with what they have to share. So let me get in. Let me scroll down into their report. Despite a rapidly changing landscape, the business case for diversity, equity, inclusion now not only holds but grows even stronger. In our research, we continue to explore the link between diversity and holistic impact. So I like this article as well. I think it brought up some very interesting points. Diversity matters even more as the fourth report in a McKinsey series investigating the business case for diversity, following why diversity matters, delivering through diversity, and diversity wins. For almost a decade through our Diversity Matters series of reports, McKinsey has delivered a comprehensive global perspective on the relationship between leadership diversity and company performance. Now, this year, the business case is the strongest it has been since we've been tracking. And for the first time in some areas, equitable representation is in sight. Further, a striking new finding is that leadership diversity is also convincingly associated with holistic growth ambitions, greater social impact, and more satisfied workforces. You combine those four things at the end there, and it becomes uh, the means for profitability. As you saw in that last article, getting serious about diversity from the Harvard Business Review, I think one of the challenges was that we saw some of the realities that were there. So, um, a striking new finding is that leadership diversity is also convincingly associated with holistic growth ambitions, greater social impact, and more satisfied workforce. Let me keep going down here. At a time when companies are under extraordinary pressure to maintain financial performance while navigating a rapidly changing business landscape, creating an internal culture of transparency and inclusion, and transforming operations to meet social impact expectations. The good news is that these goals are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, research suggests a strong positive relationship between them. And in an increasingly complex and uncertain competitive landscape, diversity matters even more. For this report, the fourth edition of Diversity Matters, we drew on our largest data set yet, spanning 1,265 companies, 23 countries, and 6 global regions, and multiple company interviews. Now, that is a very good set of data to show their support for diversity. And I will go through this, and I love it absolutely how they put this forward. We also extended our research and interview focus beyond the relationship between diversity and financial performance, which is proven, by the way. Um, but you have to add on what Harvard Business Review was saying. It can't be just a check the box approach. It has to be a pure cultural piece of the puzzle for it to succeed. And that's the problem is a lot of these organizations after George Floyd were doing it lip service. They checked a box, and then immediately when the political environment changes, they immediately abandon it, which is probably the problem. They didn't make the business case and didn't look at the focus of why it's important. So, interestingly enough, they also talk about the holistic impact of diversity on communities, workforces, and the environment. There have been far reaching changes in the business environment over the past few years, yet, companies with diverse leadership teams continue to be associated with higher financial returns. Our expanded data set shows this is true across industries and regions, despite differing challenges. Now, if that's coming from 1,000 different companies, there's a compelling case to be made that diversity in of as a cultural value enhances financial performance. Those that do lip service to it don't cross the bridge of greater competitiveness than those who embrace it. That's what this is showing. The business case for gender diversity on executive teams has more than doubled over the past decade. Each of our reports, 2015, 2018, 2020, and now 2023, has found a steady upward trend, tracking ever greater representation of women on executive teams. At each time point we have assessed the data, the likelihood of financial outperformance gap has grown. Our 2015 report found top quartile companies had a 15% greater likelihood of financial outperformance versus their bottom quartile peers. This year, that figure hits 39%. In other words, in 2023, nearly 40%, companies had a 40%, near 40% likelihood of outperformance in the top quartile versus their bottom quartile peers. What are they doing? The reality, they're not checking a box. This is compelling. McKinsey isn't small potatoes, but this shows that diversity is important. And I would add that it's not a check the box scenario, not a lip service scenario. It's a firmly backed core value of the organization. And I'm going to make a prediction right now. Those organizations that don't focus on the humanity of their workforces and focus on checking a box, that just abandoned their DEI initiatives, will have a backlash that will come back and hurt their financial performance. I believe that. Let me go on. The business case for diversity on executive teams. Difference in likelihood of, look at this chart. Difference in likelihood of outperformance of first versus fourth quartile. Women representation. Companies included. They had 383. Why diversity matters. And then their study increased over time. Look at this. Companies included. It increased. You can see the increase over their time. So diversity matters even more. The financial performance. As they adopted this, the impact increased. Out of 1,265 organizations, ethnic diversity representation and women representation, there was a direct performance improvement category of 39% in comparison to their low quality, I guess we could say that, low quality competitors, low value, human value competitors that were focused more on widgets than human beings. Look at that. I'm going to circle that right there. Look at that. Diversity should not die. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Do everything in your power to be human. Do everything in your power to make your organization and its values a human-driven organization that crosses multiple boundaries and brings multiple people together and allows multiple voices to be heard. That's the essence of it. It's just not checking a box. The reason is because they look like their customer base. They look like who they serve. There's a direct correlation. Powerful. A strong business case for ethnic diversity is also consistent over time, with a 39% increased likelihood of outperformance for those in the top quartile of ethnic representation versus the bottom. This has persisted even with 8 new economies added in our analysis of 2022 financial data. The penalties for low diversity on executive teams are also intensifying. Companies with representation of women exceeding 30%, and thus in the top quartile, are significantly more likely to financially outperform those with 30% or fewer. Similarly, companies in our top quartile for ethnic diversity show an average 27% financial advantage over others. Wow, that's amazing. It's almost a third. And in some cases, it can get as high as 40%. That's absolutely bonkers. And again, those are companies that are actually human driven, 1,200 something organizations. And then of the 500 organizations where they had a focus in their survey regarding ethnic diversity, there was a more powerful correlation to financial results as well. Just look at that. This is crazy. The difference in likelihood of financial performance. This women representation, diversity matters even more. There's a negative 31% organizations that don't focus on diversity lose 31% of the time versus an 18%. That's a near 40% bump. So these are very interesting charts that focus on these things. Now, just the top quartile versus the bottom quartile. These are financial results. That's what that represents. Negative 75% of business performance. They outperform 75% of the time of their low belonging peers. Very crazy. Let me keep going. Both forms of diversity in executive teams appear to show an increased likelihood of above average profitability. Companies in the top quartile for both gender and ethnic diversity in executive teams are on average 9% more likely to outperform their peers. This gap has closed slightly since our previous report. Meanwhile, those in the bottom quartile for both are 66% less likely to outperform financially, on average up 27% in 2020, indicating that lack of diversity may be getting more expensive. In other words, and in my mind, there's a correlation to this. If your customer trusts you to represent their values, you got a more likely outcome of better results because they're going to buy from you over and over and over again. That's the essence of what this is saying. Our latest analysis shows that companies with greater diversity on their boards of directors are more likely to outperform financially. For the first time, this correlation is statistically significant for both gender and ethnicity. Now, remember that study from the Harvard Business Review advocating not just lip service, not just creating a diversity program to create it, was 3 years before these financial results showed this outperformance financially with a diverse and focused cultural belonging from top down. It's a whole cultural commitment. And again, I'm going to make a prediction right now. Those organizations that do not focus on diversity are shooting themselves in the foot. For all I care, you could if you want to take out equity and inclusion, if that's too much of a triggering mechanism for you. And by the way, that makes me sad that you would even that would even come up. Focus on belonging. Because again, the financial results are too much to ignore. There is a correlation to organizations that commit to this. And those that don't, that just pay lip service, that check a box, that's the issue that you need to hold up to. You can't just say, oh, we're going to create diversity and then abandon it midstream. It doesn't help you. It doesn't show you financial results. It doesn't do anything to advance your cause. So that's the challenge here. See, let's keep going down. I'm going to try to skip through a few more of these because I think there's a lot of compelling stuff in here, and I love this. Equitable representation at the top is within reach. Since McKinsey first started tracking data on representation in 2015, women have made substantial gains in the workplace and in leadership. The current global data set shows that 1/5 of executive team members are women, a third higher than reported in 2020, 8 in 10 surveyed companies now have at least one woman on their executive team, up from fewer than two-thirds, while 7 in 10 have more than 10. Since 2020's diversity wins, and with an extended data set, we have now seen the highest increase in diversity in a decade. And that was all the result of the George Floyd 2020 scenario. I think that unfortunately, this has gotten politicized, but in the wrong way. Unfortunately, this is going to get these organizations that abandon diversity are going to get hurt, and it they're going to lose talent as well. So their commitment to doing the right thing, in my mind, is being more human. That's the essence of it. I see diversity as a human approach, and that's my opinion. But again, that's the challenge. 8 in 10 surveyed companies now have at least one woman on their executive team. We have now seen the highest increase in diversity in a decade and more representation at the highest levels than ever before. And that's not a bad, I think that's a good thing. We need that. This is another chart showing how that's increased. And this is just, again, keep in mind, it's just a representative data set representing about 1,265 organizations, ethnic diversity about 590. So that's a pretty good swath of the organizations out there. And I think a lot of these are Fortune 500 as well. So it's very important to take a look at this. Because each region has a unique ethnic makeup and cultural norms, we have assessed rates of ethnic representation by evaluating equitable representation levels, how closely leadership mirrors regional demographics. US companies are currently the closest to representing the population at 20% ethnic representation, but still lag behind the population share of 41%. Now, that's very interesting. Again, when we look at the makeup of diversity in the workplace, essentially matching the population, I think that's where the belonging diversity focus should be. And it's fascinating. We have continued to look at boards, given the association of diverse boards, with better financial performance and inclusive growth. And again, what does it come down to? It's the commitment and not the lip service, which the Harvard Business Review article that I was reading was showing that there was a correlation financially, that there was a correlation to all these different things, but only if the organization was committed to that from the top down. And it wasn't just a check on the box scenario. That's really what it comes down to. Over the past 8 years, we have tracked over 330 companies' progress on representation, diversity, and leadership, and segmented these companies into 5 cohorts based on both 2015 levels of executive team diversity and progress since then. Diversity leaders, fast movers, moderate movers, resting on laurels, and laggards. This is interesting. So this is their little chart showing organizations that are taking advantage of the various things. And so you got fast movers that have 30%, diversity leaders. You've got some kind of sitting there. It's about 46 kind of getting into it, but you still have about there's 46% getting into it, but you got about 54% kind of lagging. And again, that's very interesting, but this is what it shows. So anyway, that's the representation of these organizations. So about 46% as of 2023 had a good focus on this. And there were about 54% that were kind of lagging or resting on laurels. It has been particularly inspiring to find that diversity leaders have attained gender parity and equitable ethnic representation, showing that equitable representation at the top is not just a lofty dream, but a realistic goal. Further, our fast movers demonstrate that change can happen at speed and scale, with gender representation reaching 32%, the first time we've seen such a promising outcome in this cohort. These companies have raised the bar to keep pace with the changing landscape of diversity representation and leadership. Their strong performance prompted us to raise the improvement thresholds for companies from our 2020 diversity wins report to reflect the gains seen in top performing quartiles. 5 percentage points for gender and 10 percentage points for ethnicity. Now, as of 2023, apparently gains had been made in this. Now, it'll remain to be seen. We're at a very unique crossroads right now where a lot of these organizations, and the essence of the executive orders are trying to pare that back. However, already the courts have stepped in. So what's going to happen is you're going to see a lot of this um, go through the court process in the United States. Um, I think a lot of organizations will be prompted to look carefully at this, and hopefully, it'll get a dialogue going with people that are in groups that need more opportunity, that folks that need more growth, and not just because they're doing it to check a box. Again, once again, it's coming back to that has to be a human cultural perspective, and if they have that, their financial performance increases by leaps and bounds. That's what this study shows. It's so incredibly powerful, which is why you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you can't give up on diversity yet. You absolutely must stay committed to it for this very reason, and this is why. And so companies in our cohorts have shown rapid groundbreaking growth and representation, with some even attaining gender parity. Diversity leading companies in the United States have reached an ethnic representation, this is in the United Kingdom, average at 28% that exceeds the region's general population. Diversity leading US companies have reached 50% representation of women on executive teams. In addition, leading companies in the United States now have an average 39% of executives from historically underrepresented ethnicities. It also goes on to say that there's still gaps and progress that needs to be made in that way. Now, this is the argument right here that's the holy grail here. Diversity supports inclusive growth. And you absolutely must have folks that are champions at all levels of your organization to make it work, and a culture that embraces the humanity of everybody and the belonging of everybody, regardless of where they came from, what their background is, etc., and makes it so that everything is on the path it needs to be. While year-over-year financial performance remains critical, businesses are increasingly aspiring to have positive long-term impact on all stakeholders. That's the key right there, the core tenet of stakeholder capitalism. This emphasizes the interests and needs of a wider set of stakeholders, including employees, customers, and investors, prioritizes social and environmental goals, and drives towards sustainable, inclusive growth. In short, what we refer to as holistic impact. And I really, really love this term. In many parts of the world, there's a growing call for organizations to consider their holistic impact, not only within their own business environment, but on a wider scale, both locally and globally. Our research points to five main areas of holistic impact: financial and operational, capabilities, health and workforce, and environmental and social. In this report, we broaden the lens of our research, placing particular focus on environmental and social impact elements. Now, again, there was a 39% financial outperformance of these organizations to their bottom quartile peers who weren't doing diversity or focused human initiatives. That is huge. It's so crazy how big that is. It's almost, it's just so big. That's billions and billions of dollars of revenue. That's billions of dollars of opportunity. That's billions of dollars of innovation. We recognize that creating social impact alongside other business priorities is a challenging task, even for companies who have strong intentions to do so. Yet, over half of sample companies in our data set perform well in community involvement. And again, diversity should also be tied to community. Um, I honestly believe that organizations that foster innovation, that foster open dialogue to tackle problems, that's the essence of diversity in its purest sense. It's not just getting people into a seat so much as it is opening the door for people to come on board your boat and all row together and then learn from each other, which is the essence of what it can be. That's the key. We examined how leadership diversity could be linked to three components of holistic impact: community, workforce, and environment, which all have particularly close connections with employee and community well being. Again, belonging is a term I would use. The results were pronounced. Across all three components, we found positive correlations with gender and ethnic leadership diversity. In other words, their communities improved, everything improved, correlation of represented on holistic impact. You can see that their business ethics went up, so their business ethics were higher. They had better cultural understanding of their customers' data sets. Their products improved. This is what that's saying. It had all of that impact and it made them more effective, which is why they also had a higher amount of retention and talent attraction and more success in that way. In other words, they had less, their recruiters were spending less time refilling old jobs and helping with new initiatives. That's a powerful thing. And again, not everybody gets this, but it's kind of intuitive. It's just amazing to see that they had an impact on that. Let me keep going. We also found a link between greater diversity in leadership roles and diversity across the organization for a 10% rise in women's executive representation, our 2019 data set. We see an average, a 2.1% increase in percentage of both women and employees and women managers in 2021. A similar, if somewhat smaller, effect holds with ethnic representation. When there is a path for women and ethnic minorities to step into the highest roles, it suggests that there are inclusive practices at play, making it possible for all to succeed. In other words, there's greater happiness across the board, and the organizations are more healthy with dialogue within their workforce. That's really what that means. There's more cooperation, people are collaborating more, things are getting done more. That's essentially what this is showing. The last decade has been a period of notable progress on equitable representation and leadership, yet representation alone is an insufficient. This is interesting. Um, this correlates to the Harvard Business Review article I was reading earlier. The last decade has been a period of notable progress on equitable representation in leadership, yet representation alone is an insufficient and unsustainable outcome. Since Why Diversity Matters in 2015, our thinking has evolved with continued engagement in this field. From our initial focus on diverse representation and leadership, we added perspective on the practical steps companies can take to increase leadership diversity. From there, we broadened our focus to highlight the importance of inclusion and equity. Now, we are beginning to distill the essence of a holistic impact and the role that leaders play in cultivating visionary workplaces. I like that word, visionary workplaces. Um, so I love this and I think it's powerful. Leveraging our company interviews is a valuable source of refreshed insight. Our data shows that the more diverse the leadership team, the more likely they are to have made public, mature commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion in their decision making strategies. That makes sense. Transforming this commitment into bold action is the natural next step. To facilitate this transformation, we conducted interviews with diversity leaders who shared invaluable insights. These interviews surfaced 5 strategies to effectively turn words into action. This is what the Harvard Business Review is getting to. People that don't commit with a follow through are doomed to fail. And that's the essence of it. And it has more harm because they were just checking a box. And it wasn't a cultural phenomenon within the organization that gave them a competitive advantage. That's it. That's why they financially outperformed their peers, because they had total commitment to this. And it wasn't just a CEO saying, oh, we got to do that to stay compliant. They did it for the right reasons, for the humanity, and they made their organizations more powerful, better, and strategically significant. Commit to systematic purpose-led approach to benefit all stakeholders. Embed your strategy in company-wide business initiatives while tailoring to local context. While DEI strategy is typically shaped at the top, giving local teams license to tailor to local context is key. And I think this is important. That's another piece of the puzzle. A lot of these organizations didn't have total commitment to their communities. in doing these steps. And that may be why they are might be getting some pushback. That could be. I don't know. I have no proof of that, but I that's my instinct that a lot of these organizations were just doing it to check a box, and unfortunately, it wasn't a whole organization commitment. Embed your strategy in company-wide business initiatives while tailoring to local context. Prioritize belonging and inclusive practices. You notice I use this term a lot, belonging. And when I say belonging, I'm not talking about just checking a box once again. I'm talking about actually making people feel valued in your organization. It comes back to people being driven to support the mission of the organization and driving it forward. Employee resource groups are a powerful resource within organizations that can actually help. And if the organization allows multiple employees to participate from multiple cultural backgrounds with other cultural groups, then you start to see immediate impact for attracting greater and more and more talent. In other words, that's what I'm trying to say. Embolden and activate champions and allies by providing adequate resources. See, this is a sad thing. I think we're seeing some of these organizations pulling back support and resources, but I do think that's going to have this temporary mindset is unfortunately what hurts, and that leads to more problems than it does actually creating effectiveness. So that's where we need to focus on that. This part, as a culture, we've gotten away from this. Act on feedback, include dissenting voices. I can't think of a time where our culture, unfortunately, is moving away from the power of having multiple voices, um, even ones that disagree with the majority. And if people were just humble enough to listen to other groups of people, this world would be such a better place, honestly. And it doesn't mean adopting every single idea. It just means helping everyone in your organization feel comfortable. That's the key right there. So that's important. Despite a challenging business environment, the business case for diverse leadership teams is clear and growing stronger. There's a financial impact. Our findings also show a statistically significant link between diverse boards and executive teams and higher holistic impact scores, including on environmental and social measures. To achieve lasting impact along these dimensions, companies must move boldly beyond increasing diverse representation to integrating, I would say, belonging instead of DEI in a purpose driven approach where everybody is moving ahead together. And again, it's like your company takes on its own culture because you've had a lot of multiple folks involved from different backgrounds, different nationalities, different cultures, different religions, uh, even different um, LGBTQ persuasions in many cases. So I hope this is a powerful document um, for you. I really feel like they did a great job on this. Um, Finally, let me end with a few points of advice on on this for everybody. I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll go from there. And I'll just wrap up by saying I'll give a few ideas um, of what I think can really help organizations to continue to thrive. If you're in an organization that still values diversity, um, or one that is trying to make sense of the current landscape, I would invite you to look at SHRM as a resource. The Society for Human Resource Management is at the forefront of helping with all of these things and staying at the forefront of doing the right thing by people. I hope the business case makes sense. Again, there's a 39% performance impact of organizations that commit culturally to the whole diverse landscape and quote unquote belonging emphasis that I put forward. And that just means that there's a path, there's an opening where ideas get heard, where organizations are valuing their employees across the board, regardless of where they come from. And that to me is such a powerful thing. It's being in a business that's people driven like I am in. I see the power of this every day and I see why it's more important every day. So I would encourage you as an organization, what can you do? Here's a few ideas that I've tried. Um, I have found that individuals who embrace this belonging aspect, um, they function better, they listen to each other better, they compromise, they get things done faster, they add value to their customer base, they help improve the lives of their staff. Their retention is higher. They keep more employees. People tend to stick around more, and the organization as a whole thrives. And they just do better, and they're more competitive because they're able to innovate faster because they're hearing all ideas and ideas aren't getting lost in a vacuum. I could think of, I mean, just it's intuitive. So once again, thank you for coming to Where's Your Next today. I hope this was a compelling topic in these times. Um, Man, there's just so much to talk about with this. But from a strategy perspective, make sure you're posting jobs in multiple places. You're getting the word out in multiple ways. You're helping communities thrive. Your hiring managers are visible in your community. Organizations that really have an impact aren't just focused on the financial piece. It's a whole picture. And it's very easy to get stuck in a temporary mindset. And in these times, the temporary mindset is what is going to kill businesses. Because the long term mindset is what gets you over the hump, that gets you through the hard times, it gets you through recessions. And when you're working with all your employees, regardless of their background, regardless of their cultural persuasion, regardless of their religion, whatever, you have more impact because when those audiences, those employees can serve your target customer audiences that are within that same community, there's a there's a powerful commitment by those communities to follow those organizations. And that is why I think future success in business isn't just lip service, isn't just checking a box. It's all about the big picture. So I appreciate you being here. I got to run, but happy Friday to everybody. I hope this was helpful. Hope this topic was of interest, and I hope a few people will get maximum value out of it. If you'd like to be on Where's Your Next and come share why you think diversity is important, I would love to have you on. Um, Man, it's I would love to have some diverse voices on my show of differing backgrounds, wherever you come from. That adds value. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week on Where's Your next Friday. I am pleased to announce I have a co-host that will be joining me soon. I will put the name of my co-host on my feed um, in the next couple days, and hopefully we'll get him on. It'll be a lot of fun. Thank you again. Have a great weekend. Mike out. Peace.